Welcome to a very special session of Botanical Art from the First Rand Art Collection, sold on the Strauss & Company online auction. Today we're going to talk to Theresa Lizamore. She is the curator of the First Rand Art Collection in Sandton, as well as with Julia Twigg and two young designers who helped us install these beautiful pieces. And lastly, interviewing one very famous botanical artist, Gillian Condy. Hello everybody, I'm Wilhelm from Rensburg, Senior Art Specialist at Strauss & Company, and today I'm talking to Theresa Lizamore, the curator of the First Rand Art Collection. Theresa, tell me about the First Rand Art Collection.
So the First Rand Art Collection has been going for many, many years. Rand Merchant Bank, who is obviously part of First Rand, started their collection in about 1990. I happened to assist the then curator, Dr. Leonie Schmidt, with the initiation of the collection. And we started building on a collection which today has about 2,000 works in the collection. I wasn't that involved with First Rand, but Steve Bales at the time was the curator of the First Rand collection, and I know he collected quite a lot of eclectic or a lot of different types of works, and he bought what management really wanted. So he bought a lot of botanicals, he bought a lot of wildlife, bird life, just something of everything. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, and Beth van Heerden took over, and she's in charge of the collection. I started working on a more permanent basis for R&B in about 1994, became their curator when Dr. Leonie Schmidt emigrated, and since then I've been involved. But what is very interesting is that in the past year we decided to merge the two collections. And what we're doing, and I'm talking about First Rand and R&B, so we have at the moment about 5,000 works in the collection. But there was a lot of cleaning up to do, especially in the First Rand collection, which, as I say, I wasn't really involved with. I've only now become involved. And it's a vast collection of works. We are at this stage, like re-looking the collection, have a new policy, trying to become more contemporary with the collection. So we're putting quite a few works from the First Rand collection on auction. Like we're starting with the first one at Strauss in June with botanicals, some wonderful botanicals for anybody that is interested. We just feel that it doesn't really fall completely within the contemporary realm of art. And then we've got a few others that's going to follow this year as well. At the same time, we are purchasing lots of wonderful contemporary art.
And which artists are you?
Okay, I'd love to give you a few names. So obviously we have the older artists, and I don't mean old in age, but that's been around since the 1990s, like a William Kentridge that came onto the scene late in 1980. We have works like the one that we have here behind us that I sold to the bank. Must have been in the early 90s. This work sold for 5,000. I personally think, and Wilhelm, you'll help me, this work is probably worth about $1 million now.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So and we have a number of others. We have one or two beautiful irises in the collection by William. We have a most beautiful reeds landscape work, a very large work. So I think the collection has grown a lot in value. We have, of recent, we've purchased works of Blessing Ngobeni, which is in the foyer, which you can actually view now as well. A beautiful, like a 4-panel work. We have a beautiful diptych by Bambo Sabia. We have Lionel Smith in our collection. Actually also purchased a very large work for about 45,000 a number of years ago. And Wilhelm, you can tell me what you think that work is going to be worth today. It's an amazing work, and hopefully you're going to be able to view that now as well. during this conversation. We have quite a wonderful Nelson Makama that we commissioned a few years ago. And there's so many others that come to mind that one can mention. I mean, we've got Sizwe Causes, we've got Colbert Mushilis, we've got all the artists that are now sought after and that people are really realizing that new young artists that you bring in can become investment art, because I think they've all already grown in value. But then of course we've got our Lucky Sabias, we've got Jeffrey Armstrongs in the collection, and if you look at them today, they're still very contemporary. So I think we've really got an amazing collection of works.
And Theresa, if I'm not mistaken, it's not only buying work for the bank itself, it's also your involvement in the wider community. In the
Absolutely.
art, ecology. Tell us
Absolutely,
about that.
yeah. So Carolyn Waterhouse, who is in charge of the Rand Merchant Bank collection, although we've now merged, she has got an amazing creative mind, and she will always come up with amazing projects. And I think it's so important to show that softer side of First Rand and RMB, and that they care for the young artists and the future artists of South Africa.
Earlier on you mentioned the botanicals, and they will be on sale at the June Strauss online auction. Why would you be selling some of those botanical prints?
Because we just feel that we need to regenerate the collection, bring in fresher, more contemporary works. Remember, RMB and First Rand, they have a lot of young staff and they really nurture their staff. And I think it's just important and necessary to bring in the more contemporary work. So it's very exciting to be part of it. And for me also now, because I've only just recently started getting more involved with the First Rand collection, going through the collection, seeing what they have, and just enjoying it, and getting exciting about the possibilities.
That's Theresa Lizamore, Curator of the First Rand Art Collection, and Strauss & Company, very pleased to work with the bank and selling some of their botanical prints. Welcome to a special session of botanical art from the First Rand Art Collection on auction at Strauss & Company. I'm talking to Julia Twigg, famous interior designer. Julia, you were part of the selection of some of these botanical art from the First Rand Art Collection. Tell us about that.
Well, we went to the archives there, to the basement, and we chose what we thought would be a good reflection of all the South African botanical art. I first became aware of Talia Lincoln and Barbara Jeppe were the two, and I know Gillian Condy's work very well. So we picked what we could to try and give a whole feel of South African botanical art.
And then we took it some step further, where we asked you to come and install these wonderful works at our viewing rooms here at 89 Central Street in Houghton. How did you go about doing that?
Well, there were three of us. There was Atiyah and Murray and myself, and we chose the furniture we wanted that was going on the sale, and then we set about trying to make it groups of good botanical art, and the ones we thought should stand alone we put on the walls alone, and then we chose a few other paintings from the sale to add into it.
Yeah, and then the colour of the walls, for instance, what did you do there?
I chose aloe colours, because we've got quite a lot of aloes and proteas here, so I chose aloe and protea colours.
And then when people try to integrate these botanical art pieces in their interiors, what advice would you give them?
It's lovely if you can have more than one and hang them in blocks, because if you look around the room, block hanging of botanicals it's really nice, and you can compare the one painting to the other painting. And like we've got over there, we've got all the proteas, and it's lovely if you can to have a collection. But if you have one special one, it's also fantastic.
Julia, you certainly did a sterling job installing these wonderful pieces and combining them with the furniture we have online. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure, and we loved doing it, the three of us. We had such fun.
Julia Twigg brought along two young designers, Atiyah Mohammed and Murray Smith. Atiyah, what was it like to work on this project?
It was a lot of fun and it was a really good learning experience, I think. It was something new for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And you, Murray?
I had a lot of fun. I've never really played with all the decor. I've always just, while we've been learning, it's always been about the interiors and how you'd set up the space. And I've never really considered placing beautiful artworks everywhere. So it was a nice eye-opener.
Okay, and the choice of colour?
I think the colours worked really well and it really did bring the whole space together, especially with the botanicals.
Mm-hmm. And as a young designer, what would be your number one tip for people decorating their houses?
Start small and work your way up. There's no real need to just try to, decorate everything as you go. Just put one little piece here, one little piece there, and it works out quite nicely in the end.
Okay,
Gives
and
some
you,
consideration.
Atiyah, what would you say, Atiyah?
I would agree with Murray, and the more you work on things and see where you want to put things and you change, and it's a process of trial and error, and eventually your space will look amazing, like how this one did. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Murray, thank you, Atiyah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Welcome to a very special session of Botanical Art from the First Rand Art Collection on the Strauss & Company online auction. I'm talking to Gillian Condy, famous botanical artist. Gillian, I think most people are familiar with the still life as a genre in art, but not so much with botanical art. How would you say art, botanical art and flower painting differ?
Wilhelm, I think we all see artworks differently, we perceive them differently, depending on our background. So if you come from a slightly scientific background, you would see the botanicals, you would look for the scientific side of it, and the same with a flower painting from the artistic side. You know, looking at the colour, the balance, the composition and things like this. But I do think with botanical illustration there is that merging of the science and art, and it has a very special place, you know, because of that combining the two genres.
Yeah, and you mentioned the scientific part of it. So often you'd see these botanical art pieces in journals and publications and the like. And what would their specifications be, say for instance, to a botanical artist such as yourself?
I think a lot of the starting point is knowing what which publication it's going to be for, because every publication has its own format requirements. You know, the size of the page, and you know, sometimes you're allowed to do an artwork 2 or 3 times larger, you know, so that it can be reduced down. So that would be the starting point. And then obviously the collection that you're doing, if you're doing a combined collection, it's getting to know the family or the species, and that close cooperation that you have with the botanist. That's also very important, you know, because they will point out the different diagnostic features that need to be brought out. That's very important, and you know, the accuracy of everything, because everything has to, when it's done for a scientific journal, it has to match the descriptions. You have to be very careful on the amount of artistic license or no artistic license, but you still bring in the character. You know, you need to put across the character of the plant. You need to make it look attractive. And every artist has their own style, and you bring your own personality.
Yeah. And what strikes me is that you'd often see what I want to call the whole life cycle of the plant, you know, from the seed to the flower.
I think that's where the botanical artist wins over photography and things like this, because we have the opportunity to select the perfect plant or fix a damaged leaf. You know, we can move, substitute not the most attractive inflorescence, you know, and put it to a plant. And then, as you mentioned, we can bring in the seed pods and the fruiting vessels that happen a few months later, and we can add the habitat into the composition as well.
Very interesting. Now, you yourself have been involved in many publications, you know, the Gasterias of South Africa, the Pelargoniums and the like. Tell us about those projects.
Okay, the Gasterias were Elifes on this exhibition here. I've done a few books, the Pelargoniums, the geophytic Pelargoniums being one. The advantage with that one for me was the author of the book was also the grower of the plants. So like the Gasterias, the plants would have been grown in cultivation to resemble as closely as possible the natural ones. So that that's a very specialist. You know, they're not overwatered, they're not in conditions that would alter the plants themselves. And so when you have the plants readily available, it does make it much easier. With my grass hallow project, we actually, the decision was to illustrate the plants in situ, in habitat. And that took us, the author and I, 10 years of going into the field to draw in situ. So he used to do a lot of his homework. He knew where the plants were growing. He had an idea of when they're going to be in flower. But obviously, you know, if it flowers the first week of May, one year, it won't be the first week of May the second year. So you know, you'd travel for 6 hours and find that the flowering was over. So so you would then draw the plant in situ. You know, find the suitable plant for your composition, and then go back a year later. So it actually took us 10 years, but we did do the Pelargonium book in between. But you know, when you're both working, you've got to, so public holidays and long weekends were spent in the field. It was a fantastic project. It really did change the way I looked at artwork. Or botanicals, yeah. Yeah.
Now, South Africa has a long tradition of botanical art. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think it started really in the 18th and 19th century, when plants were being, as the world was being discovered, and plants were being taken by the boatload back to Europe and cultivated there. So a lot of our South African plants were first seen captured by artists in Europe and in these beautiful florilegiums and things like this. But we did have, from the sort of mid-17 or the end of the 1700s, we had the first of our botanical artists working in this country, men and women. The men had various other jobs. Most were self-taught, you know, the Herschels and the likes, you know, who was an astronomer. He did beautiful works and things like that. And he's actually interesting because he tended to do the outlines. He was working with a camera lucida, and then his wife coloured them in. Our firstborn South African artist was Anne Truter, who became Lady Anne Barrow. She married the attorney, not Attorney General, somewhere in the Cape. And she did journals of the Cape work. But then you also had people like Catherine Saunders, who was working in Natal, Hewlett, on the property down there. And she approached it from quite a different, I think maybe a bit like Lady Barrow in keeping journals of what she found in flower. But Catherine had a far more scientific approach. She was recording, she recognized that she was finding plants that were new to science and was recording them with that in mind. And she corresponded a lot with Hooker at Kew Gardens, and so hers was quite a different approach, very much scientific, not done as pretty pictures for the wall.
Yeah. And our South African botanical artists, how do they compare to international ones, say for instance?
Our contemporaries. There has been quite a change in Europe in sort of recent years, moving away from what I call the traditional botanical artist. And I think that's where our South African artists still are, and we have some world-renowned artists practicing in this country. They stand up well against international. But if you look at the Royal Horticultural Society exhibitions in London, and over the last few years, they very much, some of them have taken a section of a plant and maybe blown it up out of our normal sort of proportions and kept them accurately drawn. Or maybe there's some that have really specialised in taking a faded flower but also blowing it up into a large format and really focusing on the delicate form and the tones of that faded blossom. So moving quite away from the strictly botanical, which still very much exist. So
no, that's very refreshing to hear. You know that there is experimentation going on there.
No, it is. Yeah.
No, you mentioned Alfie Ward Hillhorst. Can you tell us a little bit about her art, for instance?
I think for me, she still remains my favourite scientific illustrator. I think she had the most amazing understanding, sort of the botanical understanding, but the sort of sympathy. She had an incredible connection with her plants, but she had the eye of a scientist. The detail that she attains is breathtaking, and there's not many who can match her, locally or overseas. I think she really made her mark. And her scientific dissections and things like that were also, I think she was very much known for including her dissections onto her plates. She will always remain. And she was one of the most gracious people. It's strange, it's a long time, since she passed away, and I still miss not going to have lunch with her in her flat in Newlands. She was a very special person.
Yeah. Then you also have people like Talia Lincoln, for instance.
Yeah, Talia was an amazing character. She didn't really see herself as a traditional botanical artist. I remember visiting her in her flat in Newlands once, and she was busy with a painting of a protégée. And she would start with drawing a bract, say, in the top quarter of her page, and she would work it up to completion. So she worked in colour pencils, but she would work up that one bract to completion. And then in the bottom quadrant down here, she would then draw a leaf and would also work that up completely. But there was no drawing, but there was no composition on the page there. That was all in her mind, and she saw it so clearly. And she would slowly build up. She would build another bract here, she would start another flower over there, a few stamens or something like that. But she had that final image firmly in her mind.
Fascinating, certainly very fascinating. Now, what about your own work? We have examples of your own work on the sale as well.
Oh, my work. I'm passionate about botanical art. I am very productive. I was fortunate enough to have a permanent job at SAMBI, at the National Herbarium, South African National Botanical Institute, in Pretoria. And I came on a 3-year contract and stayed for 35 years. So I think it shows that I enjoyed what I was doing. I think the first week I started there, Oriel Batten visited the herbarium. And she came with the originals of her Flowers of Southern Africa. and I was so intimidated. I was so close to walking out the door. It was very strange, but I really found my position. I've been so blessed with, with my job. And I think I was very fortunate also in being allowed to do freelance work. So I had to sort of be careful what I did. But I actually used that opportunity to do quite different works, either for exhibition or I did quite a few stamps. I used to live in Botswana before coming here, and I retained contact with the Botswana Philatelic, and so I did about 14 sets of stamps for them. So, there's different challenges working for something like that, working at something A5 that's going to be reduced down to a little postage stamp and things like this. So I was able to, and then I did a few of the books and things in my private capacity. So I really was fortunate.
Yeah. And Sandy is known to get the idea of botanical art to a wider public.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they are doing, for example?
Well, the colour work I used to do was for Flowering Plants of Africa, which is a journal similar to Curtis's Botanical Magazine in London. I'm still passionate about that. I think it actually celebrates its centenary this year, which is a huge milestone for a publication. There's been, we must be getting close to 90 artists that have contributed to that publication. So it's a very special mark, and a majority of them are South African artists. And then my work involved in doing black and white illustrations, pen and ink for scientific journals, which were, tightly scientific with microscope work and things like that. I think what was also, I had some fantastic bosses who allowed me a certain amount of leeway and things like this. I did start teaching, and I used to run courses for SAMBI, because I think you need to get out there and share, and get other people involved. You need to build a new generation. So I did quite a lot of teaching for SAMBI and organising exhibitions, because once you get people excited, you've got to be able to show your work to people so that people share that excitement as well. And I think with a lot of botanical artists, we become passionate about what we're drawing. We make connections with our plants. And I think for many of us, we've also tried to use our medium as a way of celebrating our heritage and bringing to the fore plants that are endangered. And so I think by sometimes we had themes with our exhibitions, but you need to tell people the problems with mining and our expanding population and what it's actually doing to our natural heritage, our precious grasslands and things like that. So doing the exhibitions was fantastic. I also had the opportunity to commission artists to do work for Flowering Plants and some of the other publications. And I grew some really fantastic friendships with them. But a lot of those artists had never met each other. And so in the late 90s, I started a few botanical artist workshops where they actually got together for the first time. And that, in a sense, was a seed for the starting of our own association, the Botanical Artists Association of Southern Africa. And we've been going for about 22 years now. So that was, and because my bosses allowed me that.
Yeah. Great, fantastic. That sense of community. You mentioned exhibitions, and I'm familiar with two mounted at the Standard Bank Gallery here in Johannesburg, in 1992, Art Meets Science, I think, and I think your work was also on that exhibition, and then much later, Exact Imagination, 300 years of botanically inspired art. Tell us about those exhibitions.
So, Marion Arnold was the one involved in Art Meets Science, and the works in the Samby art collection were very much the centre, the core of those works. So I worked quite closely with her. She was, as an academic, she was one of the few who understood the importance of botanical illustration in the art world. She was, I think, one of the few academics who actually accepted botanical as a true art form. So she was really, and that was one of the whole reasons behind that exhibition. So interestingly, the Exact Imagination one was actually my proposal. It was something I'd wanted to do for years. I was very happy that somebody else did the curation of it, but again, I'd done a lot of homework already on the artworks that I felt needed to come together. I wanted to show the history of botanical art over, say, 400 years of work in this country, and a lot of works that are hidden away in corporate or private collections. The final exhibition had quite a different, it brought a lot of modern but non-botanicals, but linked with plants and things like that. But for me, it was very exciting to actually see it materialize.
Botanical art has always been sort of like a niche interest in the past, and how does the involvement of people like Shirley Sherwood, for instance, make a difference?
Shirley has been critical, I think, she's been that seed to explode the whole idea of botanical art. When she took interest when she first started collecting 30 odd years ago, I think she was one, she came from a scientific background, but she was somebody who recognized the talent and what went into putting into a botanical illustration. With her travels around the world, she made a point of visiting local artists in the different countries she went to, but people who were unrecognized beyond their immediate circle within their country. And the fact that she started buying up artwork and quite different pieces, it's an extraordinary collection. She's now reached over 1,000 in her private collection. So she's inspired artists to do great things, and I think having written about 4 books and organised exhibitions in different galleries in the UK, she's sort of exposed her work to people who would never have seen it before, and she's given it credibility for collecting. And then in it's about 2009, I think, she approached Kew Gardens to actually build or pay for a purpose-built botanical art gallery in London, in Kew Gardens. And it's one of the very few, maybe the only one in the world, that is purely dedicated to botanical exhibitions. So we've had more than 10 years of the most beautiful exhibitions there. And I think she's been incredibly generous too, because she's also sent her artworks to different countries so that it could be shared around the world. So she's a most extraordinary person. And I think, she can be credited for this revival in botanical art.
Okay, so you can be the next Shirley Sherwood, by looking at the offerings of botanical art on our online auction at Strauss & Company. Thank you.